If there's one thing I've always shied away from in my woodworking, furniture making life, it's built-in pieces. You know, like entertainment centers, kitchen cabinets, laundry room makeovers. It was always the idea of building inside someone's home, or even inside my own home, that kind of just freaked me out. I like the comfort of my shop where if things go wrong, I know I have everything I need to fix it. And the best part is I know that nobody's watching, except everyone on YouTube. But at some point in our lives, we have to face our fears and do things that make us a little bit uncomfortable.
Cross your fingers.
So today, it's time to get uncomfortable because I'm redoing our laundry room and building in my house. I'm doing built-ins, is what I'm trying to say. So I still have a bunch of maple left over from previous builds, and I thought this would be a great way to use up a lot of this stuff. It would free up some storage space in my shop, and it would also mean I could tell everyone that I made my laundry room cabinets out of scrap wood, which I know is being a little bit dramatic, but these days drama is good. The only problem is that it would also be a total lie because I went out and bought a bunch of plywood to make these cabinets, But my desire to use up a lot of the leftover solid maple I had on hand would really kind of set off a domino effect that would kind of haunt me for the rest of the build. Spoiler alert, this project did not make me want to start making more built-in projects. Either way, what do you do when you have a bunch of plywood laying around? You start cutting it up to make some cabinets, and luckily I had some cabinets to make. When we moved into our house last year, our laundry room had absolutely nothing in it, not even a washing machine, dryer, none of that. Now, I'm not much of an interior designer, so I really went at this one with a kind of utilitarian mindset. I just kind of thought, what space do I have and what can I add to that space? So, some lower cabinets, some upper cabinets, a countertop, some shelving, and probably the biggest question mark of this whole build, I wanted to do kind of this pull-out drying rack type thing, but we'll get into all the nitty-gritty as we move along, but I just kind of wanted you to have a general idea of what we're doing right here at the start. Obviously, making cabinets out of plywood isn't really the most exciting thing to do or watch someone else do. It honestly is kind of a lame process, and like I mentioned earlier, I don't really do this type of building that often, so I don't even have much insight or pro tips to give you because I'm not a pro at this stuff. That being said, as a usual furniture maker that's dipping my toe into some cabinetry, here are my 3 hot tips that are as much for you as they are for future me when I decide to never do cabinets again. So you can use these tips if you want, or just tell me I'm an idiot in the comments. Either one works. Tip number 1, always be checking for square. I always try to make my initial cuts on a sheet of plywood as perfectly square as I can so that I know I'm kind of good to go as I progress through the project. But just in case, I always kind of periodically check for square as I go. And sure enough, in this one, I had a couple panels that were out of square. So I could trim those up before that slight discrepancy created bigger issues down the line. But if I hadn't checked again, I mean. Tip number 2, get a good crosscut blade and make sure it's sharp and clean. Whenever I'm cutting veneered plywood, especially when it's a crosscut, I use a blade specifically meant for crosscuts. Veneer has a tendency to tear out pretty easily, so using a good crosscut blade will minimize the chances of that happening, and all your friends just might start calling you the chop master, which is pretty cool.
Yo, what's up, chop master?
And tip number 3, don't try to get fancy with your cabinets. none of my cabinets are gonna have exposed outside panels, except for this one, but I have another plan for that. So I assembled everything with glue and screws, kept it easy, but being the overthinker that I am, I thought there might be a chance that you'd maybe kind of be able to see in between the washing machine and this outside cabinet. So I assembled just this side of this one cabinet with dominoes. That way there'd be no chance of seeing screws. Well, another spoiler alert, there is no chance of seeing screws in this situation. And I know this for a fact because I ended up installing the dominoed cabinet here and a cabinet with exposed screws here. So it didn't matter. And now you can really call me an idiot in the comments if you want. All right, let's take a little break from the plywood and get our hands on some of that tasty walnut. And I'll be honest, when I say a little break, I really mean it, because one of the only things in this laundry room made completely out of solid wood is this countertop. So unfortunately, it's really just a simple panel glue up. There's not much to it. Though the walnut I had on hand was 2 inches thick, so I did have to resaw all the boards in half, which that part was kind of fun. I really wish I had more to say about this part, because we all know we're just going back to plywood after this. But here's one tip. Always keep your domino nearby during a panel glue up like this, just in case you forgot to cut a mortise in one of your boards, which I did. Maybe a little specific, but you never know. All right, back to the plywood cabinets, but don't worry, I had finished the lower ones, and I know it might sound a little bit surprising, but making the upper cabinets looked incredibly similar. The process was almost identical. So similar that, for all you know, I could be showing footage from the lower cabinets right now, saying that it's for the uppers. But don't worry, I wouldn't do that because that would be a lie. I'm just saying I could, if I wanted to. But I didn't, don't worry. I didn't do that. All right, so here is the start of my cabinet doors. Figured I didn't need to show myself cutting up a sheet of plywood again, so I'm of course making it hard on myself, doing all my own veneer on these doors. I'm sure voiceover Sean is gonna explain it a lot better, but got a lot of steps in order to get everything just right for what I want to do for these doors. So we're gonna get going on the rest. All right, I don't know if there's a term for this idea, and I'm not even sure I'm gonna really explain it how it feels in my head, but does anyone relate to the idea of overcomplicating something just because you feel like what you're doing is too simple? Does that make sense? I've been trying to think of a good analogy, but maybe it's something like a chef that's making steak and mashed potatoes, but instead of doing it normally, the mashed potatoes are, like dehydrated foam or something, and the steak is crystallized meat shards, and it's all served in a wine glass or something like that. I bring it up because I never really get that feeling until I'm building something I find to be kind of boring or simple, like laundry room cabinets. And when it comes to cabinets, one of the best places to overcomplicate things are cabinet doors. And boy, did I overcomplicate these cabinet doors. For starters, I decided that using store-bought maple veneered plywood just wasn't good enough. Mass-produced plywood can sometimes really scream that it's plywood just based on the grain orientation and stuff like that. And my first thought was I didn't want that. I wanted it to look natural. So I decided I'll just make my own veneer for the cabinet doors. That way I can control how they look and make it not look like it was just plywood. The other thing is that if I were using veneered plywood, you can't really do edge details. you're either gonna cut into your plywood core and that kind of blows your cover, or you have to add thick edge banding, which can work. But if your edge banding doesn't match your plywood, it can look a little bit funky and that'll blow your cover as well. And you might be a little confused because I just added thick edge banding to my cabinet doors. But the trick here is that my homemade veneer is going on top of the thick edge pieces, and it's all made from the same board, so the transition should look nearly seamless once it's all done. And I want to be able to add edge details, and I don't want the doors to necessarily look like they're plywood. But as I'm coming up with all this, I honestly am just kind of asking myself why. What's the point? It's a laundry room, and making all the doors with veneered plywood and simple edge banding would be totally fine. But obviously I'm making a YouTube video about it, so I want to do things that are interesting and fun for people to watch. But honestly, I think the bigger thing is that it's almost kind of this imposter syndrome feeling where I maybe decide to overcomplicate things because I'm worried if it looks too simple, it might seem like I didn't try hard enough or I'm not very skilled. Like if someone happens to walk into our laundry room, I want them to look at the cabinets and say, oh, wow, are these custom cabinets? They're so not simple looking, or, something like that. But does anyone else relate to this, or am I just being kind of crazy? It's something I think about a lot with projects like this. But regardless of that, I was well on my way into the overcomplication of all of this. And I decided to do the veneer in two sections, one side of the doors first, then come back and do the second side separately, just to keep things a little simplified and organized. The first stage went well, so I figured I could just come back, knock out that other side of the doors, and they would all be ready to go. Oh, just kidding. Why is it that things go wrong at the most inopportune times? There must be some, that's not Murphy's Law, is it? Anyways, I was starting to resaw the final board for these veneers for the cabinet doors. I started to cut this one. I could tell I was starting to get a bad cut and I was getting a bit of burning. My resaw blade I've had on my saw probably like a year, never sharpened it, never even cleaned it. So I shouldn't be surprised, but of course it happens when I'm on a bit of a time crunch. I'm gonna give it a clean, but I just need to get through these, so fingers crossed. Hey, so not to leave you on a cliffhanger, but kind of to leave you on a cliffhanger, let's take a minute to thank Brooklyn Bedding for sponsoring today's video. If you haven't heard of them, Brooklyn Bedding has been making mattresses for over 30 years. They design, assemble, and ship everything directly from their factory in Arizona. So your mattress is delivered directly to your front door for free. And that means you don't have to pay the middleman mattress showroom markup. Every mattress is made with premium materials, no fiberglass, which you'd maybe be surprised is found in other mattress brands. And obviously that's not something I'd want to sleep on every night. Each Brooklyn Bedding mattress comes with a limited lifetime warranty and a 120-night sleep trial, so you can make sure it's the right fit for you. They sent me a queen-sized, medium-firm Sedona Elite mattress with a pillow top. Personally, I wanted something that was supportive, but not too firm, something cool to sleep on because I live in Texas now, and something made with high-quality materials that didn't smell like chemicals when I opened up the box. And it arrives rolled up like a burrito, which makes it super easy to move around and unpack. And I have to say the Sedona Elite checked all those boxes. It's comfortable, it sleeps cool, and it fits our bed frame perfectly. So if you're in the market for a new mattress, you can take their sleep quiz to figure out which one fits your sleep style. It only takes a minute, and I'd say that's a lot easier than going to a mattress store and awkwardly pretending to sleep on a bunch of mattresses in front of random people. I gotta say, we're loving our Brooklyn Bedding mattress, and I can't see why you wouldn't also. So if you've been needing a new bed, check out brooklynbedding.com or scan the QR code to get 30% off your mattress with code Sean Boyd. And if you wanna support my channel a little bit more, go ahead and tell them I sent you. All right, thanks Brooklyn Bedding. Now let's get back and see if we can get this bandsaw blade cutting nicely again. So yeah, obviously cleaning the blade didn't do much, and obviously I was frustrated. At this point, my time frame to get everything done was starting to look more and more unlikely. Even as I stand here saying this right now, I still need to finish the cabinet doors, and I need to get everything done, including this video, in the next 4 days. Yikes. Don't remind me. But instead of wallowing in the frustration, I needed to keep up the momentum. So back to the cabinet boxes, and they were pretty much ready to go except for some edge banding and shelf pin holes. I opted for edge banding instead of face frames because I'm gonna do full overlay cabinet doors, and face frames just didn't seem totally necessary. This choice in particular was something I kind of thought about a lot, and I kept wondering how a pro cabinet maker would do it. I have a friend, and maybe when we were back in college, when you're kind of figuring out your world views and your opinions on things, he used to tell me that he didn't like to read about specific things. Not necessarily like current news and stuff like that, but more kind of philosophies and theories about life and the world, things like that. And his reason was because he wanted to see if he was smart enough to figure out these philosophies and ideas on his own. Like, is his brain as powerful as some of the great thinkers of the past? He's a very interesting guy. But that's kind of how I felt when making these cabinets. I'm not a cabinet maker or a finished carpenter, but I wanted to see if I could come up with my own way of making this stuff without studying cabinetry techniques. Of course, I've picked up a lot of things over the years of doing woodworking and furniture, but like I've been talking about, I've always stayed away from this type of work specifically. So I don't know if I'm doing this stuff exactly right, but it seems to be working so far. Just maybe if you're looking to get better at cabinetry or finished carpentry, after you watch this video, go watch a few more. All right, great news. The plywood cabinet boxes are pretty much done. Thank goodness. So we have 2 more components for this whole laundry room project: the shelving over the washer and dryer and a pull-out drying rack. I think the drying rack is a little more exciting than the shelving, so let's go ahead and start with that. The laundry room is fairly small, so whenever we hang out some of our clothes to dry, we use those collapsible drying racks. I grew up calling them clothes horses. I don't know if that's the right term, if I've been using that incorrectly my entire life, but either way, when the drying racks are being used, they take up almost all the space in the laundry room, or we end up having to move them out into our kitchen, which is super annoying. So I wanted something that was more integrated and could be completely hidden when they weren't being used. It's kind of a 2-tier pull-out rack. So depending on how much we need to hang out, we can either pull out just part of it or both sections. And it's a pretty simple design, just some dowels between 2 side panels and some side mount drawer slides. All right, so I messed up and I got my dimensions slightly off. I don't quite have enough space for the drawer slide on this side. Gotta figure that out.
and then hopefully the second section goes a little bit better.
Honestly, the fact that this was the only issue I had when making this is pretty good. I was really thinking I was going to do all this work and it just kind of wasn't going to work at all. So I'm going to call this one a win. All right, the last piece of the laundry room puzzle is the shelving. The space above the washer and dryer is kind of a no man's land. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to put up here, but I decided some open shelving would kind of look nice, and I feel like it would be the most useful and, more importantly, the most versatile. Also, you'd think, oh, these are just shelves. There's not much to think about, but even the most basic stuff gets my little brain going. So first of all, I wanted the shelves to be thicker than a single layer of plywood, so I doubled them up. And second, I wanted the shelves to have a round front edge, which will tie into some other details in the cabinet doors and the walnut countertop. And to do this, I'm gonna really kind of go against everything I was talking about earlier with the cabinet doors and the veneer and the edge banding and all of that. For the shelves, I decided to just use maple veneered plywood and attach a thick piece of edge banding that'll give me enough room for a big round over. And just to kind of prove Sean's point from earlier, the solid wood edge on these shelves doesn't really match the plywood. So why am I okay with it in this situation? Oh, I don't know, maybe because I don't have a bandsaw blade to resaw veneer to use on the shelves and make it look real great. Maybe that's why. But also, once the shelves are in place and there's a bunch of stuff on them, I don't think it'll really matter. They're way more inconspicuous than the cabinet doors, so I just kind of told myself it would be fine. All right, this might sound a little crazy, but now that everything is built, except for my cabinet doors, we're at the biggest part of this build, and that is installing everything into the laundry room. And again, this is the most nerve-wracking part for me. It's the built-in portion of the build. When you build a freestanding piece of furniture, it can really just, go anywhere. But when you're installing stuff into a room, it has to fit. And the better it fits, the better you feel about yourself, and the more people will like you. Anyways, I started with the cabinets, lower cabinets on a simple toe kick and screwed together, then upper cabinets on a French cleat, which pretty simple stuff, nothing too fancy. But once all the cabinets were in place, I secured them to wall studs just to be safe. And one of the reasons I made my cabinets as multiple separate boxes was really for this installation process. The room's small and I knew I'd probably be installing all of this stuff by myself. So having individual boxes to maneuver and lift made way more sense than if I had made them single full width cabinets. And once the doors are in place, you really won't be able to tell any of this stuff. Now, the walnut countertop was the first part that really needed to fit in all of this because it was going to be up against two walls. And no matter how flat and straight the walls in your house might look, I guarantee they aren't. I also wanted to minimize the amount of little trim pieces that I put all around the laundry room. So I was really shooting for everything to fit as nicely as I could get it. So I first made a quick template of the overall shape of the countertop, and this would essentially be my starting point. And because I knew I had a bit of wiggle room between the edge of the countertop and the washing machine, I could cut the countertop to pretty closely match the template, and that would allow me to set it in place in its actual spot. Then I could scribe it to the back wall and the end wall, and from there I could trim those two edges to the scribe line. I also cut these edges at a slight angle so that when the countertop is pushed in place, I was sure to have a sharp edge against the wall, and I wouldn't risk any little discrepancies creating gaps. Honestly, this is the type of stuff that's the most intimidating for me. I'm in a best case scenario because my wood shop is right outside my back door. So I'm able to do all of this stuff and go back and forth whenever I need to. So because of that, it really makes me respect the people that do this kind of work in someone else's house and without a wood shop full of tools at arm's length at all times. So with a bit of practice on the walnut countertop, I can now shift to installing the shelves. These required a pretty similar process. So I again started with a template, and you can really see here, this wall in particular was extremely wonky. And I will say the rest of the walls were not that much better. One thing I realized is that I had this panel on the end of my upper cabinets to cover the ugly face that's full of screws and all that stuff. And it's also going to act as a mounting spot for a trim piece. But I could remove this for now, and it would give me just enough wiggle room to cut the shelves to length to match the template. But I could also add just a bit of length to them so that I could then scribe the opposite end to that wonky wall. So I temporarily put all my shelves in place to get the vertical spacing. Then I could scribe and trim everything, and also trim that excess length on the end to match the thickness of that panel that would go back in place. And that was just a straight cut. And I know I mentioned how great it is to have your wood shop just a few steps from where you're installing stuff in your house. But I will say it also is kind of a pain because of how many times you end up walking back and forth. So with the shelves now cut to fit, I could start working on how to hang them in place. I went back and forth with how intricate I wanted to get with this, but in the end, I didn't want the shelves to have any sort of, like mounting hardware or mounting blocks or anything like that. And luckily they're surrounded on three sides by walls, so they're not exactly floating shelves. So what I decided to do was cut a groove around the back edge and the two ends, and that groove would slot over a cleat that I attached to the wall.
Oh, you ever feel like everything's kind of working against you? Now it's my router. I was about halfway through cutting all the mortises or grooves, whatever you want to call them, for these shelves, and doesn't turn on. I tried different plugs, and I'm on such a time crunch right now. And so this is the last thing I need. I have another router in my router table, so I'm probably going to pull that out and use that spindle, that motor. Another part of the ongoing saga. Gotta love it. Stay positive.
Okay, crisis averted on that one. Maybe this is a sign to keep 2 bandsaw blades in my shop as well. So thanks to my backup router, all of the grooves were cut, and I just needed to install the cleats on the walls in the laundry room so the shelves could actually be installed. The trick here was getting everything lined up and level, and I figured it out with a level, straight edge, careful measuring, and maybe a bit of luck.
Cross your fingers.
And really the bottom shelf was the most critical, because once that was in place, the next 2 shelves just referenced the bottom one, so it was a lot easier. Though of course, the last one, it's always the last one. I guess I ran out of luck and I had to switch to a little bit of persuasion.
Cross your fingers.
Well, at this point, it feels like the finish line is in sight. Everything is in. I just need to install the cabinet doors And to install the cabinet doors, I need to finish making them. And to finish making them, I need a working bandsaw blade, which I don't have. What I ended up doing was finding a decent blade for my small bandsaw, which I actually had on hand. So I decided I was just gonna have to be okay with maybe like 6-inch wide strips of veneer instead of the 8 or 9-inch wide pieces that I was planning to use. The only problem was,
well, I can't make this stuff up. I finally thought I had it figured out, to cut more veneers for these cabinet doors. I had a small-ish resaw blade for my little bandsaw. Certainly not as accurate, not as fast, but it gets the job done. And as you saw in the clip, the lower tire popped. So now I'm really stuck. Honestly, at this point, my only option is to try this one again and maybe just go really slow, or I'm out of luck. Yeah, I don't know what to do.
so my absolute last ditch option was really to just kind of power through. And with the narrower boards and understanding I was not going to get paper thin slices right off the saw, I was able to limp through and get just enough for what I needed for the doors. Once I got everything cut, sanded, and glued to the doors, I finally knew I was actually gonna get all of this finished. But now it was really a sprint to the finish line because of how much time I had wasted. This footage of me installing the hinges, sanding, and finishing was from this morning, and I'm posting this video tomorrow morning. So I guess if something else catastrophic happens, this video might just end here. Just kidding. There were no more catastrophes. I was in turbo mode now, and at this point I was really getting limited footage. And you might notice I didn't even get handles for the doors. A little bit of an oversight, but who needs handles anyway? I was able to put the finishing touches on the doors and get them installed really in the nick of time. So did this project make me want to start building kitchens and become the finished carpenter I never knew I wanted to be? Of course not. And I'm pretty sure the universe was also telling me that I shouldn't. But I will say, I'm glad I tried it, I'm glad I got it done, and I'm glad I never have to do it again. So, thanks for joining me on this journey. If you watched all the way to the end, you really are the true hero of this. But just remember, always keep 2 bandsaw blades on hand, and know when you finally conquer that chaos and push through the quandary, you get to spoil yourself by doing some laundry.